Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Mind Magic with Taylor podcast. I am revamping my old podcast for a solo one in honor of the release of my new program, The Cosmic Upgrade, for women who are looking to heal their attachment wounds to love and money. Love and money, as I talk about on my page, on my platforms, operates at a similar frequency. There's similar energies, and they both require you to heal your relationship with receiving. So I wanted to come on here for this first episode and really just talk about my own story and why I think life has led me down this path to help women heal these very specific patterns in their life. Oh God. So I um where do I start, really? Where do you start when you're telling your story? I guess, yeah, it just starts with growing up. This is also going to get into why I love astrology so much. So, growing up, um, I've talked a little bit about my mom. I don't know if I believe, I don't know what I really believe about like medical diagnoses and, if these are just labels that we give things or whatever. But I think that if you were to put a label on it, is bipolar. And also, I believe she has some sort of like manic rage disorder. It's like very quick shifts in her mood. And yeah, I mean, she's been that way as long as I can remember. I don't have really almost any positive memories of her. Um, like things that she would try to do that were nice were always tied to something really horrible that she did. So it's not like I don't have any memories to be like, oh, it was so nice when she XYZ because it was tied to her trying to make up for something really awful that she did. So, when it comes to her, I've healed a lot of those wounds, but it is still very difficult. I don't think a lot of people fully understand what it's like to feel nothing for someone. I mean, obviously, I feel a lot of pain and grief for the absence of a mother, but it's not like she was ever a mother and then I lost her, or that there was these great things, but I had to let go of the relationship. I haven't seen her in 5 years. I had to let go of the relationship because, their bad outweighed the good or something. There wasn't really a lot of good. And, I understand her story and why she is the way she is. And astrology has really validated so much of that for me in my work with plant medicine. And I connected with empathy for her, but it is still just not safe to have a relationship with her. So that's kind of the story with my mom. And all of this is getting into how it impacted my own attachment patterns. And then my father, he's a really interesting character. He's very charismatic. I think he has a very high IQ. He's a natural leader. He's built some incredible things in his life, businesses, and he's lost them as well. He grew up in a very traumatic environment. Um, yeah, very violent, angry father. His mother was 13 when she had him. So he still carries a lot of trauma and has struggled with addiction his whole life and hasn't really been emotionally available. I started seeing him some maybe around the time I was 7. He had had a child with someone else. And so he asked my mother, she was actually married to someone at the time, so I had a stepdad. And he asked my mother if I could start coming there. Well, I really didn't like going over there. He barely talked to me when I was there. He would mostly have me watch my little brother, who I love that kid now, but he's in his 30s. But at the time, he was a monster. They like gave him Pepsi in a bottle. So it was like some real redneck shit. And yeah, I just remember I was just kind of like, he would like take my brothers somewhere and have me help my stepmom clean. Like I was just kind of his helper and he didn't really pay me any attention. So, yeah, I hated going over there, even though at my mother's house, it was not better. So, I've been asked before why I seem to have more sympathy for my father than my mother. I would say I definitely saw, domestic abuse in his home. There was angry, violent outbursts. He said really cruel things to me before. And, a lot of, like I said, really heavy drinking. But I wasn't his target. with my mother, and I understand the dynamic better now. Something in me really triggered her, and I was very much a direct target of hers. And I had to learn strange things that if you're listening to this and you understand it, I'm glad I'm telling this story because I think just to hear other people tell stories similar to this, it's very validating. But it was be like, I remember as I got older, if I would want something or want to do something, she would just, because I was so disconnected from her emotionally, she would use those opportunities to yield power over me. So if I was excited about like an event at school or doing something with my friends, I would not act excited because in a shift of a mood, she would be like, well, you can't go. Just to like just to spew hate towards me. So I learned to never to act very neutral about everything, to not act excited about things, because I knew she would hold that over me and, potentially take that from me. Yeah, I mean, she would really spew her insecurities onto me, like made a lot of comments about my weight, about my hair, about how I dressed, how I looked, like constant. She would give my friends like compliments in front of me and then make disparaging comments about me. So she would humiliate me often. I mean, that was like regular. It was also very humiliating when she would go into a fit of rage. And sometimes that was in front of my friends. I remember in high school, I don't have my memories are fragmented and I understand why. But yeah, I mean, she would say horrible, horrible things in front of the few friends that I would allow to come into my house. I think maybe looking back, that's why some of their parents would let me stay over a lot. I never really like asked or knew if they said anything to their parents, but I had a couple friends that other people weren't allowed to stay the night on school nights, but I was. And I was fortunate. My dad owned a salvage yard. He did give me a car when I was 16, and I can remember like because I didn't really have a curfew unless she felt like it would just be like if she felt like, exerting control over me. But other than that, there weren't like um consistent expectations. It was just whatever mood she was in. And I remember on weeknights, all my friends would have curfews and they would be at home. And there was like this loop where in the neighborhood where we lived, and I would look over until like I'd see her light go out because I would try to like avoid going home until she would go to sleep. It's just pretty much consistent, terrible energy to be around, and you never knew what you were going to get. I mean, you might get a, hey, how was your night? You might get a, you look like a whore, fuck you. I mean, that was what it was. And yeah, I also think it is relevant to say on my page, I told the story about my first plant medicine experience where I had this download, this realization, this very clear knowing of what happened to her at the hands of her father, my grandfather, and what happened to me. And so I did connect with empathy for her in that moment because before that I had just hated her in like a sheer rage kind of way. Um, and I did connect with a lot of empathy because I thought, he died because he had died a couple years before that experience that I had. He died letting everybody think she was crazy. And now I see what's wrong with her. I see what he did to her. He stole everything from her. And okay, I got this. He stole a lot from my brother and I too. Yeah. And it has been a process and a journey to let go of hatred for him. And which is ironic because when he died, I loved him so much. I thought I didn't. He was just this like super special person to me. I had a tattoo for him on my wrist that I have since had covered up. And I actually threw away everything he'd ever written me, every momentum of his ad, threw away his ashes, threw those in the dumpster, just all of it. Um, yeah. So that is a little bit about what it was like growing up. So I really did not have consistency or safety with either one of my parents. And I did have an aunt who I was very close with, my mom's sister, who did show me love. I lived with her, my brother and I lived with her for a year and a half at one point. That was really great. her and my uncle and my cousins. She had written me this really beautiful letter, like telling me how proud of me she was and how much she loved me. And I can remember, I have memories of like sitting in this attic, which was my room, when I lived with my mom, and something like really bad would have happened with my mom, and I would just be up there crying and reading the letter. Like I hid it in this little purple thing, and I would open it and read it. And it was this like just a really special memory of, things that helped me get through that really rough time in my life. And so, yeah, around high school, I started to look different. I really like came into myself, and I was, people thought I was pretty. And that was the first time that I really felt any love. I did have, again, my grandfather, but my aunt, but, you know, from my parents, I did not feel that. And so when I went to high school and I started dating, it was like, I obviously quickly got into these codependent, unhealthy dynamics. I remember I had a boyfriend who also had an abusive parent. And yeah, but it felt safe with him. It felt like home. He understood, sometimes I remember one time my mom hitting me when I was in high school. I came home to like get something, and she was freaking out about something and screaming at me. And I don't even have like a clear memory of it. But I remember I drove to his apartment because he had moved out of his parents and gotten an apartment when we were like 17. And it just felt like a safe space. And I think that that heavily obviously influenced my attachment patterns in the way that I started to associate relationships. They were home, they were safe, and it didn't matter if they were actually safe or not. They felt safe to me. And that felt like where I could get the love that I was really, really desperately seeking. And I also created this belief around achievement and doing things and being good at things. And um, yeah, I graduated when I was 17, went to college. Um, at this point was really struggling with alcohol, did not have a healthy relationship with alcohol at all, would get completely blacked out every time I drink. And I had a boyfriend at that point. He was 23. There was a lot of toxicity there. But yeah, I'm really naturally good at school. I have a gift for learning. So even though I was like drinking way more than I should and not always making the best decisions, I was very adamant about getting good grades. And so because, I wanted that to me also was associated with being loved, being pretty and being smart and accomplishing things. And so, yeah, that pattern pretty much continued on. Fast forward, multiple different very toxic relationships. At some point, I just got this idea in my head that marrying someone with a lot of money, like had this kind of belief of all men are toxic, all men are going to cheat, all men are going to be abusive. But if you're with someone with a lot of money, at least you have a lot of money and status, and people like you. And I desperately wanted to escape this old like poverty shame that I carried because my mom could not keep a job at all. So like I remember her car, she had this old car that she'd had forever that my grandfather had given her, and she'd wrecked it like 5 times. And at one point, like the whole back side door was like completely dented in. There was one tail light. Like it was really bad. In middle school, I remember having her like drop me off like way before the entrance to the school. And then after that, I just rode the bus because I think we didn't live in the district. So she had to drive me at one point because I would have rather rode the bus. It was rough. Um, and yeah, there were just all kinds of like at our house, our furniture, she would get it from like the side of the road, and it would be just like all ripped up, and, like our carpet ruined, like our house just kind of falling apart, really. So I grew up into the kind of person that wanted everything to be perfect all the time. I didn't want, no matter what I had to do to like keep up appearances, that was extremely important to me because otherwise I would start to feel that old poverty shame come up that would trigger me. So very particular about all of that, became, really just obsessed with not feeling that way again. Yeah. And so I wanted to date people with money. And I wanted to have a lot of money and I wanted to have a lot of things. And I wanted to be wearing designer like other girls. And I felt like those things would finally make me feel good enough. Because I was battling a lot of not enoughness beliefs and looking back, understandably so. I mean, it makes sense. And yeah, in my 20s, I would date people with money. There were times where I went through phases of having like a guy who I guess you would call it like a sugar daddy, and um, just yeah, not caring about anything but having money and looking like I had money and keeping up appearances. And then at the same time, I thought that all of those things would get me the love that I wanted. So I was still searching for something, mostly in very emotionally unavailable partners. That would get into these kind of like codependent dynamics, but where I'm not going to say I was doing emotional labor because I did not know how to do emotional labor, but I was definitely with closed off people. And looking back, I know that even though I would present as really anxious sometimes, and in very explosive, intense ways, I know that I was actually disorganized, because the walls in me were attracting other people with like major walls up. So, yeah, um, had a really long relationship with a man who was significantly, they were usually always like 10 years older than me or more. And yeah, I have nothing bad to say about him. He was definitely emotionally closed off, but he was a good man. And he kept me safe and took care of me. And there just wasn't a lot of like, he just avoided conversations about everything to the point where I would absolutely explode. I remember times where I would pull all of the clothes out of our closet, like in just a crying fit rage. I would sit if I was pouting about something and not able to communicate what hurt my feelings. Because through all this time, I'm a highly sensitive person. I know that about myself now. I didn't realize that then. I'm very sensitive. And I would pout for hours, and he would not be the kind of person that would ask me what was wrong ever. So I would just sit there furious. I would do so many things to try to like get reactions out of him because he was so just stoic all the time. I can remember like hitting him, chucking bottles at him. One time I got really angry and I picked up a bar stool and tried to break the windows of his house or one of the windows out because he was sleeping and wouldn't wake up and, engage with me in this tantrum I was throwing. And after incidents like that was a particularly bad one. And there's way more details that actually got worse. But the next day I would wake up and think like, God, who are you? Because there was a part of me that wanted to be just this normal girl, and I didn't want to be that kind of person. And I would be like, why did you do that? And when you're having these like really intensive, explosive episodes, I mean, like your ego has to compensate to protect you from the reality of that. Like it is very difficult to look at yourself and your toxic patterns when you are having intense triggers in that way. It is not easy to look at because it's like, oh shit. So, yeah, definitely have looked back at a lot of those times where I felt like a complete victim and seen, my role in a lot of these situations. Not that I don't have an empathy and understanding after everything that I've been through for the things that I've done. And yeah, during this time, I'm a school teacher. And a really damn good one too, because also being highly sensitive, I can feel people's pain. When I would see kids who were like having these extreme outbursts, which you see often in public school, I just really I could feel it. I knew what it was. I knew it was just a person in a lot of pain, and I approached and looked at it differently than a lot of people I worked with, which made me really good with kids with extreme like behaviors. And yeah, I moved to the city I live in now and moved to Louisville. My hometown is like a smaller town on the Kentucky-Tennessee line, actually, which is why I'm so twangy. And yeah, I moved to Louisville and I got a job working in this school that was in a really tough neighborhood. So a lot of poverty, a lot of crime, a lot of refugees, a lot of things going on. And yeah, I've seen things that you wouldn't believe. It reminds me of a story my best friend, who's also a teacher, told about a similar school that she worked in. And at a faculty meeting once, this man stood up and said, I have done 2 tours in Afghanistan and nothing could have prepared me for this place. Because if you know, you know. Okay. But yeah, I went into, so I got my first master's in special education and I started working as a special education teacher and I had most of the high level behavior, the students who had emotional behavior disorder labels on my caseload. And I was just really good in working with them. I mean, I built a really strong bonds, trust. Not that I could get them to listen to anybody else, but I could reach them when they were having episodes. And so I kind of was utilized, obviously, for that in a lot of ways in the school. And then when the person who was like this 6'2" there was this man who was like a former baseball player. He was like 6'2", huge guy. He was the building behavior coach, like the person who was the positive behavior intervention specialist is what his title was. And he was in charge of like carrying a radio and being radioed to if there was incidents and like keeping the school safe and building behavior systems. And when he was getting another role, he recommended me for the position and was like, I really think you should apply. And I was like, what are people going to think when the behavior person is from you to me? I'm like 5'3". He was like, no, you're really good with de-escalation. You're really good with these kids. So I did that for a while. And then that was, taken notice of. And I ended up getting promoted to a role in central office. And so then I got my second master's in educational leadership. And then I ended up getting my doctoral degree in educational leadership. So, yeah, I mean, that's my professional career part. But on the other side of that, I was still going through very toxic patterns in relationships. At this point, I'm still blacking out mostly on the weekends. There were times where I was using drugs all weekend, and then it would take me like a couple days to kind of recalibrate and feel normal. I remember one time waking up in my living room, and I didn't know how I'd gotten home. I saw on the app I'd taken an Uber or whatever, but the door is wide open to my house. I'm like on the floor in my clothes, and I'm like, this is not a way to live. This is a way to die. And it's just like no clue what had happened, no clue how I'd got home. And this wasn't a regular occurrence. So yeah, at work, I started doing presentations on trauma-informed care because I really fell in love with, um, you know, being an advocate for kids with trauma and how that played out in their behavior. Because there was a lot of like, the narrative around behavior is like, oh, these kids, they're out of control, they don't know how to act, and like people were like, we need harder, harsher punishments or whatever. And I just always had a really nuanced way of looking at behavior from through the lens of trauma. And so started presenting on that and I read this book and it was called The Neuroscience of Learning by Zaretta Hammond. And it talked a lot about the neuroscience of behavior and it talked a lot about how trauma impacts brain development and causes reactivity and all of these other things. And so in reading the book, I was actually like, oh shit. It's me. So, I'd always hidden all these dark parts of myself, and I felt like did a pretty good job of it. I think if people that I used to, work with or whatever didn't know me in any other capacity than that, were to watch this, they'd be like, "Oh shit." But I'd always, had a lot of like, I felt like I'd lived a double life, really and had not dealt with my pain and honestly didn't even give myself any compassion, like just didn't think about the past, was just looking forward to try to create what I thought would make me feel better, which was always having more money, being with someone with money, wearing designer, like even if that meant maxing out my credit cards or, dating someone where there wasn't actually alignment. I just wanted to feel enough. Oh, sorry, my nose is running. And yeah, oh gosh, where am I at in the story? If you're still here, be patient. Give me a second. Okay, so yeah, all of that is going on. Read this book, read about the neuroscience of trauma and was like, oh wow, and started to actually give myself some compassion. It was a very emotional experience. And then I wanted to read everything about how trauma impacts the brain and how trauma impacts development. And it was like it was the first time in my life that I felt seen, that I felt understood, that I understood myself, that I could be like, wow, holy shit. So much emotions that I was feeling. Started therapy. Started when she first brought up inner child work to me at that point, I had so many walls and vulnerability was so hard for me. It still is, which is why it's amazing that I'm creating this right now. But it was so hard for me back then. Like I've come a really long way. And yeah, I was like, I'm not doing that. That's weird and also hokey. Like I just couldn't get into the concept of it at the time. And yeah, it didn't really improve my relationships, but at least I had a lot of self-awareness. And yeah, I got into a really toxic relationship that there would be. I believe that everybody, this is what I tell clients, I believe that everybody ends up getting into a relationship with someone who either mirrors their dynamic with their mother, mirrors their dynamic with their father, or if you have a mother and a father wound, which many people do, you'll have both. So I definitely have both. I have long-term relationships that were these charismatic, funny guys that also had really bad addiction or drinking problems that were, good providers, but they were very emotionally closed off. And so that would be like more my dad. And then also angry. Like there's the anger piece there too. But then I had one relationship that was definitely a mirror for my mom. There was a lot of gaslighting of my reality, a lot of like turning things around on me. If I would complain about something, suddenly I was a narcissist and it would just like confuse reality. It was actually really good at confusing my reality. And I had shared a therapist with a therapist that I was working with at the time. I said, sometimes I'm like, don't know what to think. I forget the argument and then he does something really thoughtful and we're kind of back normal and that happens again. And she was like, for 1 week, write down everything that he does that upsets you and how you felt and why. And after like 4 days of doing it, I read and I was like, oh, this is my mom. This is 100% my mom. Yeah. And at the final end of that relationship, I knew I had to do some drastic things to heal. I knew I had to really just like heal myself, whatever that meant. And I was searching for something. And I was consuming everything. I really loved Andrew Huberman at the time. I was obsessed with everything he said about the brain. I wanted to understand more and more about the brain. I'm still continuing to present a lot at work about trauma-informed care. I was coined the trauma-informed care expert because I was so excited to talk about the brain and how it impacts you. And I had a lot of really good feedback from presentations I would give on it. And I love talking about it. So a lot of awareness, a lot of up here. Then I started reading about, okay, neuroplasticity, you can change your brain. How do you change your brain? So I read all these different things. First I tried ketamine therapy. So yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I remember thinking the first time I did a round of ketamine therapy that for like a month after, I felt amazing. I was like, is this what it's like to not deal with constant crippling anxiety? This is amazing. Like, great. But then it would come back. And so someone had told me that, personally for them, mushrooms or psychedelics worked better as a healing modality because ketamine, it's like makes you feel good for a little while, it resets your vagus nerve. But everybody needs something different. Some people, ketamine might be the medicine that was for them. But I understand now why psychedelics was what I needed. So yeah, I started reading about that, listened, watched every documentary and was like, okay, this is not going to be like ketamine. Like ketamine is like you're floating. And there were times where the ketamine was intense. Don't get me wrong. Like I remember one experience, like sometimes it's hard to describe, but sometimes with the ketamine, it's like you would kind of float in and out of reality. Like it would, like things in would look different. And then it would be like I could feel myself kind of losing touch with what I was doing and who I was. And I'd be like, whoa. So the ketamine was intense. But from everything I just read about psychedelic experiences at high doses for healing, was like, okay, this is for an anxious person who always wants to be in control. I was very nervous. I was watching the content of this page. It's called See You on the Other Side, for months, probably a year. And then I started like messaging them about their content, asking questions, and yeah, set up a time, did like this whole intake process and set up a date and time to have someone sit with me on a guided journey, working with 5 grams of the medicine, following the John Hopkins protocol. At this point, I'd read everything. You know, still don't know what to expect, but I was like, okay, I'm doing this. And actually, it's funny because at the time I was still so deep in my attachment wounds. I had met this guy who was like textbook avoidant attachment, and I was, he had done it. And so I think that's part of what motivated me a little bit at the time was like, oh, he was like, when are you going to do it? I was like, oh, I'm going to do it. And also, I could see my patterns coming up with him when we had started dating. So I was like, oh, I've got to fix these things. And I thought that that would fix them. And really, I mean, that was the start to a much longer journey to becoming secure in attachment. But this might have to be a two-part series now that I'm getting into it, actually. Yeah, so took the 5 grams, and I remember a few nights before I had written in my journal, I'd written, it's going to be okay. I know you're scared because this is like a huge thing, but we're going to take back her power. And by her, I meant my mother, because my intention for the session was to really, yeah, I mean, work on my rage. I was like, I'm dealing with a lot of anger, and being people who drink a lot and have a lot of repressed rage, it's not really the best combination. Actually, I remember giving a presentation on the use of psychedelics and EMDR for healing because, side note, at one point I was microdosing psilocybin, because I tried it once. I had read about it. I had tried it once, and I noticed it made me feel so much more open and like comfortable talking to people and not so closed off from people, because like whenever I would go places, I would really only talk to the people I knew because I still, at times it takes me a little while to warm up to people. But yeah, I had used it that way. And then I was trying to do EMDR with my therapist. This is actually a crazy story. And I couldn't get through the blocks in EMDR of the emotions. She would be like, on a scale from 1 to 8, how does that feel? And I was like, I don't feel anything. And she was like, okay, well, the feelings will come up when they're ready, like when your protector parts are ready to let them in. And so I got this idea that I would take this chocolate bar at the time, that was all I had, of mushrooms, and I would microdose it, drive across town, sit in her parking lot, microdose it, and then go into the EMDR session without telling her I was doing that. And actually it helped it with the EMDR. It did help me connect with emotions. But yeah, I think back on that version of me and I'm like, wow, she was really determined to heal. That's pretty badass and pretty extreme. Yeah, so in EMDR, this is relevant to the first mushroom experience. In EMDR, I had been processing like my stepdad that my mother was married to had like a sex offender. He was on the sex offender registry friend that would come to our house and had these like creepy memories of him from around the time I was like 9. And so I was processing that in an EMDR session, and the feeling of like ickiness or whatever. I've told this story, but not in this much detail. The feeling of like ickiness that would come up is what I was focusing on. And what happens in EMDR is your brain shows you a movie of all the times that you have experienced a belief or a feeling or whatever, and makes connections between events in your life that you had not yet made connections between. So I was doing EMDR, and started with that belief and would get back to this Mickey Mouse, this like giant Mickey Mouse that played tapes that I had in my playroom when I was little, like before I was 5, like when we lived in this house that we lived in, just me and my mom till I was 5. And I was like, why would that come up in the EMDR session? Like, why is that? It's weird. And my therapist at the time kept trying to get me to push past that. She was like, keep going, keep going. And it would show me the Mickey Mouse and that's it. And so my first psychedelic experience with 5 grams was probably a year and a half to 2 years after that. And so I drink the stuff. I'm terrified. I'm like, what is going to happen? I have an eye mask, have like the music, meditation music playing. And the lady who was sitting with me just came and sat in the other room. She was like, I'll be in here if you need me. You're kind of just going to go inward. And as soon as it like set in, it was like, because they say that psychedelics remove the wall between the conscious and the subconscious brain, the block. And it was just like a voice in my head that was like, what happened to your mom, everything about like child development, child psychology, about trauma, why she is the way she is, what your grandfather did to her. And that also happened to you. And it was like this like shock wave that went through my body because I was like, what's happening? And then it started like showing me all this evidence, like evidence of it. And, my mom had told me this about something I had told her when I was 3, you know, when I was like 10. But at the time, my grandfather was like the most important person in my life. And she wasn't a trustworthy person to tell me things. So I just thought she made it up out of spite. And she had also around that same time told me about her experience when she was little with him. And then it was like all these other little things that I had not allowed myself to see the truth. And yeah, I felt these waves of like grief and rage like run through my body. Like my hands were like this. And I looked at this, it's covered up now, but I had a tattoo that said, with all my love, Papa, in his handwriting that I'd gotten when he died a couple years before. And I was like, wow. And I just looked at that tattoo and I lost it. And yeah, I mean, it was just like all of my memories just started running through and like missing context, missing context, missing context. It was like they started to like rewire. And I did connect with empathy for my mother in that state. And then afterwards, I found this picture because I kept thinking about that Mickey Mouse from EMDR. And I found this picture of myself at age 3 years old in my playroom. And that Mickey Mouse was in the background. And I was like, holy shit. Um, yeah. Oh man, that's the first time I've told that part of the story without like tearing up. That's awesome. Thank you. And yeah, about a month later, I also spoke with a family member that confirmed a lot of details to help me like make more sense of it. And I was like, okay, this is true. This is what happened. I still have not had a direct conversation with my mom about it. I just haven't. I don't know that not to say that won't ever happen, but I think you would have to understand her more to understand my reasoning for that. I thought about it for a long time, but it didn't feel safe to connect with her. I did try to open up contact with her in very like limited ways where she had texted me from someone else's phone because I'd had her blocked for years. And I allowed her to text me for a while, but then, she lost those privileges. Let's just put it that way. And yeah, I mean, that was just like a really big band-aid ripping to what I'd been carrying. I mean, even when I look at old photos of myself and the way I couldn't even just like these heavy, heavy eyelash extensions and like this like white blonde hair and like 20 times more makeup than I wear now. And I was like, I was carrying so fucking much that I needed to let go of. That's why. That's why. Whew. Yeah. So that was the start to my journey. I took several more plant medicine experiences. That is not, while that allowed me to release so much trauma and also understand that I am highly sensitive and that I, absorb people's energy and I have to protect myself energetically. that is not where the real shifts came from. I think that the plant medicine helped me have the ability to let go of so much old stuff where I could look at things with a new set of eyes and I could do hard things and make hard changes. But it was still, it took me being so determined to change my life, to shift things. I mean, it started with relationships. I took almost a year of celibacy, which was like, if you know my history, is crazy for me because I had always needed like intimacy and closeness in relationships to feel good. And in the beginning, I was not planning on doing that. It's not like I walked into that situation and was like, oh, I'm going to take a year of celibacy. It was, um, yeah, I guess like I just knew that I didn't want to accept less than what was a good partner for me. And I knew the person I was becoming, and I knew I wanted to attract that. So I made myself a vow, like, I'm not going to just casually date. I'm not going to I read all this stuff about the energetics of sex, and I was just like, at one point, I was like, I'm saving myself for marriage. And then I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna just date anybody. I'm gonna focus on myself, and if somebody comes along, okay. But I kept kind of like also in the beginning had this energy of waiting for someone to come along. I'm like, okay, spirit, it's been like 2 months. I've been working so hard. Where's my person? Like that was my motivator for working so hard was wanting a good partner. And at the time, the way I saw it was not that this was untrue, but I had very um, tunnel vision of like, I want a good partner. I want to be loved. I want to get married. And so I have to get myself perfect and heal every part of myself first. And obviously, that is not true. But at the time, that is how I looked at it. And yeah, I mean, that year was like the best thing I could have ever done. And that was me every month being like, okay, he's gonna just show up any minute now because I'm still doing my work. Oh, must have more work to do. So that's really, was kind of the motivator behind how I went that long. And the beautiful thing is that in that process, I did start to realize I was like, because in the beginning I was like, God, going to sleep every night alone and just being alone, having nobody to talk to me, nobody to lift me up, nobody to compliment me, nobody to make me feel pretty, things I had been heavily reliant on for my entire life. I was like, it's not so bad. And I was like, oh, I'm okay. I'm okay. All right. I'm still okay. All right. This is getting easier. And so, the paradox is kind of that like I was trying to do this to be good enough for this perfect partner that I wanted. And in the process, realized that I was okay without a partner, which made me like, gave me all my power back. Right. So, yeah. Um, and I'm in a really great relationship right now, but I am learning how to be safe in the unknown, be safe with someone with receiving with a good person who's like thoughtful and consistent and loving and caring. I mean, that's actually terrifying at first. Yeah, so letting my nervous system adjust to that. And I feel so incredibly proud of my journey with love and relationships. And yeah, I think part two is going to have to be my journey with money. So that's kind of like my journey with relationships. And it's almost like I didn't get a break in between because as soon as that really, you know, healed itself and called in this great partner is when it was like, okay, now all your scarcity and money wounds are going to get triggered and you're going to have to heal those. And so that is also a crazy story, but I love making the connection between what was going on with me with relationships and that like disorganized patterning and how that was also showing up in the way I dealt with money. Even when I was making a lot of money, it was just like those two things were manifesting very similarly in my life. And I think that is the case with everybody, which is why I launched Cosmic Upgrade, is to take all of the tools and the lessons and the wisdom and the things that I have learned on this journey and share it with others and be a guide for others, or else I wouldn't have been through everything that I've been through if I wasn't meant to do this work. All right. So part one, that's my story with healing my relationships. Now, part two is going to be how I healed my relationship with money. All right, guys. Love you. Until next time. Bye.